Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Higher Ed Careers, a podcast from Herc Jobs. I'm Jessica Wise, Co-Executive Director and Director of Programs at the Higher Education Recruitment Consortium, also known as HERC. The show is designed to help you explore, launch, and grow your career in higher education. Each episode features insights from higher education professionals, career coaches, and HR experts who share real stories and practical tips to navigate the higher education job market. Whether you're just getting started or ready for your next move, we're here to help you discover opportunities and build a fulfilling career in higher education. That's what we're here for, and that's what we're most passionate about. Our guest today is Sonya Ponder, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Talent Acquisition Manager at Princeton University. Sonya manages talent pools and develops inclusion policies at Princeton University. She creates best practices for the talent acquisition team and strategies to boost job opportunity visibility. She acts as a subject matter expert, guiding hiring managers and leaders on inclusive hiring practices. Sonya was born and raised in Massachusetts during the era of the Boston Celtics and New England Patriots. She now also supports the Philadelphia Eagles with her husband. She loves Disney and has a daughter who shares her love for Mickey Mouse. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Sonya.
Thank you so much. And it's really interesting hearing your bio read back to you.
I know it takes a moment, right? And all the things that you do. So
Right.
I'm so excited to share that experience with our audience. And we before we were on air recording, you had mentioned that your job is a little different. So I'd be so curious to kind of dig into that and tell us what you do on a day-to-day basis, kind of what your role and goal are, and then we'll move on from there. So
Yeah,
welcome,
sounds good.
Sonia.
Thank you so much. So as Jessica mentioned, I'm Sonya Ponder. I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Talent Acquisition Manager at Princeton University. It's a lot of words, but really my goal here is to help our talent acquisition team as well as the folks on campus who are hiring, specifically for, our staff position. So in this role, I don't support, our dean of faculty, but mostly our staff positions and administrative roles, to really help them to put more consistency into their hiring practices. I really facilitate a lot of different workshops, different trainings, to create different toolkits for people to really understand what are some best practices when it comes to talent acquisition, especially from a lens of inclusion, right? So ensuring that there are things like accessibility taken into account, that we're really thinking through how are we assessing talent, what are behavioral based interviewing, techniques that we can use to really make sure that we are, really holistically looking at talent in a way that comes up with the best qualified candidate at the end of the day. So I'm not directly recruiting for any requisitions. I do, events like this. This is my first podcast, so that's awesome. But different workshops where we'll speak to members of the community about what it really takes to be, successful at Princeton, walking through the application process, different roles. I, speak with different groups on campus, units on campus about their hiring practices and how they can better be more consistent there. So it's a role that I think I'm the inaugural role for this. I've been at Princeton now for coming up on 2 years next month, which has been really exciting. I've learned a lot here, and it's been really great to be able to work from both the lens of talent acquisition, but also from a space of inclusion and working with our some of our diversity practitioners as well.
And I think that for our listening audience that may not realize that that's happening at their institutions or the institution they're applying for, knowing that there's someone there making sure that the process is fair and equitable is really important because they may not realize that. You mentioned talking about being able to be successful at Princeton. And I would love, maybe we'll personalize this question a little bit and see
Mhm.
kind of from your experience, what has really helped you thrive there?
Yes, for sure. It's a great question. So as I mentioned, I've been here for about 2 years. I remember the application process here very vividly because it was the time where I was getting married. There was a lot of different things happening. And so the process and just the engagement that I had with the talent acquisition team really stands out in my head. Because the process was, for me, it was actually pretty straightforward. And the things that the recruiter had talked to me about were just, what makes someone successful here. So I felt like I really was prepared to kind of talk about my strengths. How does that align with the culture here? And so some of those things include just being really relationship focused. I think that this culture here is incredibly collaborative. It's incredibly relationship centric. So you are constantly building relationships, with your colleagues, whether it's in your own department, in another department across campus. For me, because I am supporting, from a central location, I'm supporting so many different units. I've had the opportunity to really build relationships with folks who I don't sit with, who I don't see every day, but have been able to make those connections. And so that's one thing that I feel like has really helped me to thrive here, and to thrive, especially in my role. But I've seen so many folks, whether you're in a role that's an independent, contributor, individual contributor, or if you're a people leader, being able to, navigate and build connections with people is really critical here. I'll also say the ability to communicate across all different, levels and different groups and different audiences. That's really, really key. We are a university, obviously, that has so many different types of roles, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But being able to have a conversation with a senior leader or someone who's a colleague of yours, or then someone who may be actually external to the university, having the ability to communicate transparently, and empathetically is really, really key here too. And I feel like that's really helped me to thrive is being able to adapt kind of how I communicate to the different audiences, whether I'm in the office here or I'm giving a presentation on campus. That's been really key as well. I'll also say it's interesting as a university who has been around for hundreds of years and is in a historic town. There's historic landmarks everywhere. Sometimes it feels like you're walking around Hogwarts, which is beautiful. There are people who have like long tenure here, but one of the things that I think helps individuals here to grow, whether it's, in their role or even, in their personal development, is just being able to embrace change. It sounds contradictory, right? It's being somewhere that's been around for this long. But as we all know, especially those who are working in higher ed right now, things are changing really, really quickly. So being able to adapt to that change, embrace that's happening, no matter how uncomfortable it feels in the moment, and being able to know, who are your resources? Who do I go to? How do I make sure that I'm compliant with this new change or this new development? That's really critical too, being able to have that level of flexibility and just really one of the things, of course, it's university, so we're here to learn, but having the mindset of always wanting to learn and really wanting to understand how things work, and understanding the culture and the nuances of the culture, because, there's the overall Princeton culture, but every department that you're in, it has its own microculture. So just being able to adapt and kind of think with that perspective of, okay, here's the role in the chair that I'm sitting for in. How can I help someone who's coming from a different lens and a different perspective to see the commonalities or kind of adapt to kind of how they're doing to a way that's more consistent or can be a better workflow for them at the end of the day. So I would say those are the things that really are critical in being successful here and that have helped me to thrive. But learning and adapting has been really, really huge for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those relationships, I've seen that play out is so critical, and that is understanding the culture of the other group and the communication and the listening skills and all of those things are such critical pieces for success. I'm wondering, and we're kind of jumping around here a little bit, but when you think about that, and it's not even versus, but that and how folks are evaluated. So a lot of things that we're hearing from our job seekers, how to put their best foot forward. So what are the experience and skills that folks should be highlighting to make sure that they're evaluated in a way that the university values and can see rolling into positions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, like, when we're looking at the first step in the process, right, which is submitting your resume, your application
Mhm.
materials, it's just to really, really look at that job description in terms of
Mhm.
what are the key skills that that specific role is looking for, and how do you align your strengths to that position, right? And so sometimes you'll see folks who apply to a full gamut of different roles at the university, and they
Mhm.
may not have a thematic, a tie-in that ties them all together, or they're not necessarily best aligned to someone's skill set. So I'd say the first impression is making sure that you're applying to something that does align with your skill set. And if it doesn't, if it's not exactly the same title, or you feel like there's maybe some room to some room where you want to elaborate or kind of give someone even more insight into why you're applying to that role, that's kind of the point where you might want to consider a cover letter, to expand upon, why am I applying for this role? What are my motivations? Not just reiterating or spitting back what's on your resume, but like this is why I'm actually interested in this role. This is why I'd be a good fit, and actually making it personal, right? Using your
Mhm.
own voice and speaking in that cover letter, I think is key. But when it comes to the skills that set people apart, it really does come down to like showing that you've had the ability to collaborate with others. Demonstrating that in your resume. How have you worked cross-functionally? How have you brought in key stakeholders? How have you been inclusive in the way you're doing this, right? Like taking perspectives from maybe different teams and getting buy-in or weigh-in from other folks. I think that that's really helpful and critical here. We are, of course, it's higher education. We want smart people who are great at what they do. But like I said, like that human piece, that relationship piece, it's hard to put that in a resume, right? So all the times that you can kind of express how you've worked with others and worked on a team, I think is really, really helpful. Obviously, we have, technical roles here, things that require very technical skill sets. Of course, you want to highlight those on your resume, and in your application materials, but it's kind of the collaborative relationship centric pieces. Of course, there are some roles here that you really would benefit from having higher education experience, right? And really understanding how to navigate the different culture, the different mechanisms of how higher education works. But for me personally, when I came here, I did not have a higher education experience.
Mhm.
In fact,
Mhm.
my experience was in financial services, and before that in corporate retail. But I'd worked with universities before, right? I was a recruiter. I worked with a lot of universities. So I didn't necessarily have this exact experience. And so that question comes up a lot is, do I have to have that? Not necessarily. There are some roles that might require that, right? If you're working in a very specific student affairs area. But for some of our other roles, right? If you think of IT, if you think of HR, where I sit, if you think of our finance and treasury team, you don't have to have higher education experience to do those roles, but you really want to highlight, where you've been able to demonstrate those strengths and experiences in similar roles or roles outside of this industry. So the way that we typically assess it is, through the application process, we're reviewing resumes, and we actually do review resumes. We're not using any, filtering or AI software. These are humans who are going in and reading resumes. And if you do submit a cover letter, like we're reading those cover letters, if it's not required, obviously you don't have to submit one. But even if it is, a lot of times, folks are reading those. And then we assess for those skills, obviously through the interview process, through behavioral-based interviewing, to ensure that there really is, you have demonstrated that you've used that skill in the past, even if it hasn't exactly been in higher education.
Yeah, that's all. I'm thinking using kind of your experience, but I think a lot of folks are kind of in that same realm where they've not applied to jobs in higher ed and they're kind of pivoting their
Hmm.
materials. And the advice is the same, customize and, all these things that we hear about when we're applying to jobs in general. I'm curious for you if there's any other things that either you experience or you advise people that are kind of a little different in higher ed. Like where are people needing to kind of really think about their materials in a different way or kind of approach it in a different way from if they'd been applying to other sorts of industries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a lot of the times are something that I've experienced here, right, is because we work in academia and there is on top of that, we're in an Ivy League institution. Sometimes there is the mindset that being able to, put forward a cover letter, in an industry where before this we were not reading every cover letter, right? Being able to demonstrate your motivation in that cover letter, I think has been really critical. I think also just like really when you're looking at your resume and you're submitting it to something in higher education, I think the skills, yes, you obviously want to, list out the skills, the technical skills that you have. You want to be able to list out, the different coding or whatever it is that's important for that role. But you also, if you've had experience, in higher education or like you're looking to pivot to higher education, having that in the objective or kind of like your summary of your resume, if that's something that's included, I think has been helpful. And to really, I think the motivation I think is huge. One thing that's really big here is, our mission, right? I think our informal motto is in service to, in service to the country and in service to humanity, right? And to the world. And so the underlying motivation for folks here is wanting to tie back to that mission, right? Of being in service, of being tied to something that is going to have an impact on the world. And that is such a intangible thing, right? It's something that you don't really think about when you're applying to a job. How is this going to impact the world? How is this going to tie back into the greater scheme of things? But that really is an undercurrent here. And so if you're able to emphasize that throughout your application materials and your summary of like, I'm looking to do something to um drive impact in a mission or in a mission, aligned organization, that sometimes goes a long way. It goes a long way further here than I've experienced in any other place, right? In any for-profit institution that I've worked in. So I think that alignment with the kind of mission and goal of the university is huge. And that's a hard thing, right? To really get across in black and white and paper. But there are definitely ways to do that. And I think also, in my space, we're hiring specifically for, administrative staff for service positions. So we're not necessarily hiring for faculty, right? We're not looking at, CVs as much as we are, resumes on this side. But even for some of our research roles, obviously these are longer documents, right? These are longer, credentials that we're looking at. And so sometimes that can be intimidating for folks who are looking to pivot from other organizations or other industries into higher ed. Is like, do I need to submit a CV? Like, do I need to put all my research if I haven't done any research, what do I need to include? But I think sometimes it's helpful just to know the job description, know the role, but just also know that you're applying to something that really is mission critical, and that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, that reminds me, way back, our risk management team was super involved with one of my projects because it had student travel involved in it. And when you think about risk management roles in other institutions, it may not be connected in the same way, but in higher ed, it's connected to student or faculty outcomes and engagement. And so that piece of it is really important. I think drawing that out and kind of approaching it with that mind frame
Right.
you're going in is really valuable. And I think it also, for people that have never thought about careers in higher education, but want mission aligned work, that's a huge opportunity and really exciting to pull that to the surface. So I'm glad you have that same impression. I want to dig a little bit into roles because we hear so much from our job seekers. I'm not a faculty member. Higher ed's not for me. I want
Right.
to hear from you kind of what are some of the things, the sort of range of roles that your team is kind of touching and especially things that you people may not realize are roles in higher education.
Yeah, for sure. I love this question because that was me, right? When I knew early on in my career as a recruiter, I loved working with university students. It was just brought me a lot of delight. And so I thought at one point, I think it would be great to work at a university, but I was thinking of it from the lens of like career services because a lot of
Mm.
what I've done is, career services related work. And so when this opportunity came about, I had relocated from Massachusetts to come live with my husband now. And I had put on alerts on LinkedIn for Princeton University, and I was expecting things to just come up for that were in student affairs, and I wasn't sure if I would be, qualified because I didn't have a master's degree. I wasn't pursuing it at the time. And so when this role came along and I saw the job description, I said, wow, this is actually very aligned to what I'm looking for, and it's at Princeton. What are the odds that all of this timing is really in alignment? And so one of the first things I think that John Egbert, who was the recruiter who hired me, so shout out to John, one thing of the first things he had mentioned to me as someone who was coming as an outsider into the industry was, we function like a small city. You have to think about all of the different pieces that help a university work, right? You have everything from the folks who are actually engaging with the students from an academic standpoint, but then also their campus life folks who are helping with student organizations, the food service workers, the people who run payroll, right? So it's a small city. And I think that I use that perspective a lot to just remember that I need to adapt how I'm interacting with folks and just to understand how big this place is and that I still play a critical role even amongst all, 5,700 staff that are on the administrative side. So that being said, there are a lot of different types of roles that we are hiring for. And as I mentioned before, the Office of Human Resources isn't hiring for faculty, right? So I see the wide array and the diversity in the types of roles that we hire for here. So obviously, I'm in the Office of Human Resources, so human resources aligned roles. within our compensation teams, our client services teams. But the roles that I see most frequently that come up, especially within the past 6 months or so, you could think about within our campus life. Our campus life team. So that's like our university services, our athletics. So, physicians, nurses, folks on the administrative side as well as the clinical side of our health services teams, athletic trainers. I've seen, roles come up in athletics for both coaches and assistant coaches. When you think about our campus security, right? Our Department of Public Safety, we have both security officer roles, we have, police officer roles, different roles within, our environmental health and safety. And then we have a lot of academic units on campus, as you would imagine, and they're not just hiring for faculty, right? They're also hiring for administrative and coordinator roles. So, there are 36 academic departments on campus, and they're hiring, outreach coordinators, they're hiring administrative assistants, they're hiring, folks who are helping to, program manage. There are a lot of different programs, as you can imagine, that need either assistant managers or managers. And so you'll see a lot of those roles come up. I think that those are the ones I'm seeing most frequently. But in the broader scheme of things too, there's also, we have research, computing engineers. I think we have one of those open right now within our IT department. We have a lot of folks who we have onboarded who are working in either procurement, or within some of our grants administration. So those are a lot of it's like a full spectrum, right? And then we're always looking for folks who are working in our facilities and maintenance departments, as well as our food service workers. There are folks who are working in the library, and then shout out to our recently reopened art museum, which opened up on October 31st of last year. It's a beautiful space, absolutely brilliant work they've done over there. And so, even thinking about folks who work in the art museum, right? You have, obviously there's volunteers but there's also folks who are running that new beautiful facility. So it's a lot of different opportunities here. And a lot more, my eyes were open, mind blown when I actually came here and said, oh, he's right. You have tra
Yeah.
parking and transportation. It's a small city. So there's a lot of different opportunities here for folks who have been in the industry, for people who have not worked in higher ed. There's just a lot of opportunity.
And yeah, absolutely. The small city and sometimes big cities is a perfect
Right.
analogy because pretty much every job you can imagine is there. And I
Mhm.
really love what you pulled out there, what you did with your own pathway, which is to set those job alerts where, on her jobs or anywhere else
Mhm.
and start to read them because the job titles aren't always like the most appealing or they might not describe the job, but
For
you
sure.
have to read a lot of them to kind of understand how things are described. So if you're a coordinator in a department, what does that really mean? What are you really doing day to day? And that might not necessarily be the same thing you would see on the corporate side. So that makes a whole bunch of sense to get in there and do that and read those through
For sure.
as well. One thing that we know folks are really interested in hearing about is career growth within higher education because it may not be as obvious as some other industries where you kind of have a lockstep approach. So when you're thinking about maybe your career growth as you're talking with peers, how does that really happen with at Princeton and higher ed?
Yeah, so here it's definitely different than what I've experienced in other organizations, right? There are a lot of different ways to grow here, either upwards or, laterally. Sometimes it's, you're actually growing within a role, right? So you're working within your same team, your same reporting structure, and maybe you go from, manager to senior manager or specialist to senior specialist, right? And that's coming by having, clear expectations of what does it take to get to that next level, ensuring that you're building that skill set or that experience into your goals, and then working towards those goals throughout the course of the year, right? So that's kind of the most common way that people think of promotions or think of growth is that way, and it does happen here. But a lot of times too, there are growth opportunities outside of your team. It could still be in the same department, or it could be in a completely different unit on campus. I've spoken to some of my colleagues here in HR who actually started, out in academic units and then have moved to central HR, by, seeing opportunities that are presented on the career website and then, really communicating or, reaching out to that hiring manager or that recruiter to make sure that they understand what that all involves. And then getting the support and buy-in from, their current manager once they're going through the process. And then you also see people and that could be a role that's similar, right? So for me right now, my title is diversity, equity, inclusion, talent acquisition manager, right? So maybe I want to go for something that's, the same level and I want to go for, assistant advisor for career services or something like that. That could be at the same level. Or I could look and actually apply to something that would be a level up, but in a different department. But again, goes back to just aligning your skill set to what makes sense and preparing yourself. I think that a lot of times, you know, people think, if you work hard enough, you're just going to get promoted. And that could be the case in a lot of instances, but you also just need to understand to set yourself up for success is to really align what you're doing and what you aspire to do to really gaining the experience to do that. And so for me, I could take myself as an example. If I did want to at some point pivot from, the HR and staff side to the student side, I know personally that to be in those roles, you have to have, student affairs experience or similar experience or some type of certification. So maybe I want to go and get pursue a higher education in that space or make sure that I'm getting some type of experience where I'm working outwardly and actually integrated with that team or just getting shadowing experience, anything like that, right? So it's really setting yourself up for success with your own goals and working with your manager that to identify like, these are my strengths, these are the areas where I really want to develop and working that into your goals that way. And then we also have a lot of opportunity here for professional development, not just from your own growth and step by step of working up the ladder or what have you. But we have a really, really great learning and development team here who has, centralized learning where, you could go in and learn about how to better time manage and, work that into your goals work that into, what you're talking about with your manager so that you are, constantly developing yourself and also have the support of folks who are there, to lead you in your own professional and personal growth as well. So there's a lot of ways. It's not as, corporate ladder as you would imagine. You can go left, right, up, sideways. As long as you're, in lockstep with kind of what are you looking for and also constantly exploring what's out there because even working in talent acquisition, I learn about new roles all the time that I'd never heard of, or, like you mentioned, like the titles are different, and I'm like, what is this? And you read the job description, like, oh, actually sounds really cool. I think I could do that. So it's really coming at things, approaching things by knowing yourself, but also keeping an open mind because of what you think the next step is, there might be a better next step that you never even thought about. So being open to exploring as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important perspective because a lot of us right now, for time or whatever else, we kind of want a little bit more linear approach, but that could be limiting. And the thing I've always really appreciated is, like you said, managers do want to see you succeed. And, even if you can't stay in that role, although they might want you to stay in that role because you're amazing,
Right.
they do want you to stay at the institution. So I think that growth is something that they can absolutely support you with. And then just figuring out what else is out there, those informational interviews, I think folks really kind of don't always see that as being part of that kind of like you don't just have to read job descriptions, talk to the
Right.
real people, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, pick up the phone and say, Sonya, talk me through your day. What is
Yeah,
this like? What am I learning? What do I need to know? And that can be really valuable so that you're a little bit more kind of have some more clarity on where you want to head.
absolutely.
Yeah. When you're thinking about kind of, we talked a little bit about folks that might be moving into higher ed and have some experience. I'd
Mhm.
also really love to hear from you for those folks that are just kind of fresh, maybe don't have a lot of work experience, how they could position themselves coming into higher ed. And part of the reason I'm asking you this is that so much of what you talked about was, yeah, have the training, have the hard skills, but what these other sorts of things. So how can they best position themselves if they might be new to the job market?
Yeah, for sure. This is a great question, and I worked a lot with early careers folks for the like bulk of my career. So, I would say if you are, you don't have a lot of experience and you're approaching the job market, especially approaching the job market in pursuit of careers in higher education, um, networking is your friend. And I know that is easier said than done, right? We have professional networks that you can use, LinkedIn, but there's also a lot of opportunities where you can, either attend workshops or, career fairs. I would say learn about the different opportunities you have to interact with folks who work at the institutions that you are, considering applying for. Like I mentioned, when I got this role, I hadn't like networked a lot with a lot of the different recruiters, but one of the first things I did on LinkedIn was to put that job alert for Princeton and then to learn more about just the different people and team members that I could potentially be working with. In kind of working that way. But I feel like people do find a lot of success in actually, connecting with the recruiter or connecting with someone who may, work in the department that they're pursuing. And there's a fine line, right, to tell when it comes to, introducing yourself and networking and how often do you contact and what information do you share and how often should I be following up, right? And so there's definitely a balance of, introducing yourself and saying, "Hi, I'm Sonya. I am really interested in working in higher education. I have, these two internship experiences where I've worked for the last year at X, Y, and Z, and I've gained a lot of experience doing this. Would love to connect for future opportunities, right? When people send me messages like that, no matter how busy I am, even if it's coming back to it a couple weeks later, and I do try to keep on top of it because I don't like notifications in my inbox, but I do like I'll respond and I'll connect and I share a lot of things on my own LinkedIn where I'm just, sharing out jobs or sharing out things that are happening at the university. And so stay as connected as you can. I feel like one of my favorite stories is someone who I had met at a career fair who had applied for a role, but they weren't the right fit for the role at that time. But they did stay connected with me through LinkedIn. They reached out intermittently, maybe, once a quarter or so, just to check in and see how things were going. And then ultimately, they did land a role because they were able to stay connected that way. And I want to say, like, this job market right now obviously takes a lot of resilience. There's a lot of people applying for a lot of different roles, and there's a lot of stress out there. So if you are able to make a human connection, or at least get a face to a name, or I think that's really helpful. So that's one way. And then when applying, like I said, being strategic about doing so. I know that again, easier said than done, right? When at one point you might just be like, I need to land something, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But really trying to be strategic because it does show, when I'm going into the system and looking at applicants, like I can see, you've applied to these 10 different roles and there's a theme here. Okay, this person probably, could be a good fit for one of these positions because there's a theme and something that's tying these things together. So I would say, that human connection, aligning your strengths, and then kind of the tenacity and resiliency of understanding there's a lot of people out in the job market right now. And sometimes it does come down to volume versus skill. And I feel like sometimes especially people who are newer in the job market and haven't understood the level of rejection that can come sometimes, is that sometimes it really you could still have a strong resume and there could be 100 people who applied, who already applied, and so sometimes it's just timing. So the sooner if you see something that is really interesting to you, like gather your materials as soon as you can. Be thoughtful, of course, of reviewing them and making sure you're submitting the right things, but apply as early in the process as you're able to, so that you're able to overcome some of that volume, right? So that you're earlier in the process. So you're, when a search first starts and there's a lot of momentum behind, with the recruiter and they're going through, the earlier in the process you apply, the better. And like I said, it's always good to kind of to do some networking or understand of like who's going to be involved in the process because they could also help, help you in the process if there's something that you're curious about or you have questions about. I think that that's also a helpful thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and this is a little bit tangential to what you're saying, but I'm thinking about, some people might feel like they can only apply to one job, but
Hmm.
I love the image of kind of that storyline being built out with multiple applications. And that also makes me think about the timeline of applying
Hmm.
to jobs in higher ed because it is a lot slower. And so
Yeah.
that can be, we know that it's potentially slower than other industries, but knowing that that connection and understanding more, it's each time it's a little bit hopefully closer, maybe not,
Right.
but right, getting you
Right.
that step closer. So as we're starting to wrap up, I'm wondering if there is one piece of advice. We've talked about so many good things to keep in mind. Kind of what's that one thing you want to leave our viewers with as they're
Yeah.
applying to jobs in higher ed?
For sure. So I thought about this question and I had a whole response. I had a whole response in my mind of what I was going to say. And then as I'm sitting here and we're having this conversation, I've kind of changed my mind of what I think is really I would love people to walk away with. And it's something that I feel like was really impactful to me as I joined this organization, right? So here at Princeton, it's one of the best universities in the world, right? And there is a lot of prestige and a lot of, pressure you could assume, right, coming into this institution. And one piece of advice I'd love to give people is that if you have the strengths and the skill set to do a job, do not let that intimidate you. It's very easy to have imposter syndrome, even going through an application process, even going through just submitting your resume. Like, who do I think I am applying to this place? If you are more than capable of working in this space and working in a place that you could never have dreamed of or imagined, right? And I work with some of the most down-to-earth, authentic people every day, even when I'm interacting with colleagues or people who are working in academia or who are working in other roles on campus. I interact with so many really genuine people. So just know that I mentioned earlier on, right? Like recruiters are reading your resumes. It's people reading resumes. You want to be, able to build relationships here. But even through the interview process, I would say 9 times out of 10, like you're interacting with someone who genuinely wants to find the right person for the role, but they're a person too. And so for the most part, it's, people want to be able to build connections, understand how would you kind of work with the team? How would you, fit into the puzzle that makes up their different groups? And so, as intimidating as it can be to apply to something, either it's the name and the prestige that comes along with it, or just changing industries and something brand new to you. Um, the worst that can happen is a rejection, but the best that can happen is you can end up somewhere you'd never expect. So keep that in mind. A lot of people can't imagine themselves in places that they just it seems out of the realm of possibility, but it absolutely is a possibility. We strive to hire people from all sectors of society, people with all different types of experiences, and we could be doing so much better if you apply even if you never thought you could be successful here. So I think that that's something I'd love people to walk away with is you really can thrive and succeed in spaces that seem extraordinary. And it's such a cool place to be once you enter the room and there is still, still Hogwarts. But you do have a little bit of magic, right?
Oh, I love that. And that really for me goes back to that mission aligned work. So if you feel like you can, you want to contribute to that, you should be in the room, right? You should be
Right,
there, and not to kind of pull ourselves out. And we know that that's really tough right now in the job market where, it's hard to keep that confidence and that resiliency that you're talking about. And I love that at Princeton. And I know that that same feeling is at all kinds of colleges, whether you're
right.
applying to a community college or Princeton or whatever else it might be, that sort of kind of passion that walks in the room with you and the people are really, really so critical to what makes this career path so interesting and fulfilling. So thank you for sharing that. This has
Of
been
course.
such a great conversation. I can't thank you enough for being part of today's episode. And I want to tell our viewers if you are interested in launching your career in higher education, to be sure to check out Herc Jobs. Not only is there that we talked about job alerts and searching for jobs and reading job descriptions, so all that's there, but there are also some great resources if you're first time applying, if you are coming from a specific background and you're looking for resources there. Could start your network as well. That would be a great one. And please join us next time for Let's Talk Higher Ed Careers for more real stories and practical advice from across the higher education community. Thank you for joining us.